Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. This time we're going to be talking about a really pivotal moment in Middle Eastern history, a moment that really reshaped the political landscape and plunged a nation deeper into this world of shadows and intrigue.
Yeah, it is fascinating how a single event can really send shockwaves that just reverberate for decades.
Totally. And, we're talking about the assassination of Lebanese Prime Minister Rafi Hariri, right? I mean, that's
Yeah.
really what we're focusing on. And you've provided some really incredible source material detailing this event. And we're going to be focusing on the relationship between Syria and Lebanon in the early 2000s.
Yeah, and I think, what's fascinating about this story is that there are some pretty chilling parallels to other stories of power and intrigue. The Godfather, for example, where you see these themes of loyalty and betrayal play out with really deadly consequences.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing how those themes just keep recurring throughout history. So
Yeah.
so let's set the stage a little bit for our listeners, right?
Yeah.
Syria has historically exerted a lot of influence over Lebanon, right?
Yeah.
It's almost like they treated it as an extension of their own political and economic sphere, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, absolutely. They definitely saw Lebanon as a key player in their regional ambitions, a vital piece of that puzzle in their quest for influence and control in the region.
And then, of course, in 2000, we have Bashar al-Assad taking over after his father's death. So
Yeah.
what was the initial reaction to him, on the world stage? I mean, he's this new figure stepping into some pretty big shoes.
Yeah, I mean there was definitely a lot of uncertainty surrounding Bashar, right? He wasn't, this seasoned politician like his father. He was seen by a lot of folks as, inexperienced, maybe even a little bit hesitant to fully embrace that, that mantle of leadership.
Sort of a Fredo figure, if you will, from The Godfather, right? Not quite the one you would expect to be calling the shots.
Yeah, I mean the analogy works on some levels, right?
Yeah.
But what's really interesting is how quickly that perception shifted. The
Yeah.
sources really highlight this growing tension between Assad and Hariri, who, was really becoming the symbol of Lebanese independence.
So what was at the heart of their conflict then? Was it purely about Lebanese independence, or were there other factors at play? I mean, you had these two really strong personalities kind of clashing, on this regional stage.
Right. Well, Hariri with his vast business empire and all his political connections, he really represented a very different vision for Lebanon, right? One that was less reliant on Syria and more aligned with Western powers. He was really pushing for these economic reforms and greater autonomy for Lebanon. And of course, that directly challenged Assad's grip on the region.
It's almost like a scene out of The Godfather Part 2 with Hyman Roth kind of challenging Michael Corleone's authority. You've got these two figures vying for control and influence.
Exactly. And then you throw in the UN resolution calling for Syrian withdrawal from Lebanon, and it just added fuel to that fire. I mean, it was such a direct blow to Assad's pride and really a clear signal that the international community was siding with Hariri's vision for a more independent Lebanon.
So you've really got the stage set for a power struggle of epic proportions here. And things take a very dark turn, don't they? The sources describe these escalating threats against Hariri and his allies. There's this one particularly chilling incident where a bombing victim's body parts are delivered to his family. I mean, talk about a gruesome message. It's almost mirroring that horse head scene from The Godfather.
Yeah, a truly horrific act. And a clear indication that this rivalry was no longer just about political maneuvering. It had really descended into this brutal, almost mafia-style campaign of intimidation and violence.
And then in the midst of all of this, the sources really highlight the involvement of Hezbollah, this powerful group within Lebanon. So what makes them so powerful? What are their goals? How do they kind of fit into this whole puzzle?
Well, Hezbollah is a really complex organization, with deep roots in Lebanese society. They have a powerful militia, significant political influence, and they have a strong base of support among the Shia community. Their goals are multifaceted, but they've traditionally been aligned with Syria and Iran, often acting as a kind of proxy force in regional conflicts.
So they become a key player in this unfolding drama. The sources suggest that they were actually tasked with surveilling Hariri and ultimately orchestrating the assassination.
Yes, the details outlined in the research are quite chilling. Multiple Hezbollah teams were involved in this operation. They meticulously tracked Hariri's movements, they were gathering intelligence, and they planned this whole operation with such a high level of sophistication that it really points to a very high degree of coordination and planning.
And then comes that fateful day, February 14th, 2005, Valentine's Day. The assassination itself, the sources, paint a really vivid picture of what happened.
So on that day, Hariri's convoy, really the symbol of his power and his stature, they took their usual route along the Beirut waterfront. But, unbeknownst to them, a white Mitsubishi van packed with over a ton of explosives was waiting, near the St. George Hotel.
It was a meticulously planned operation, wasn't it? It's almost like something out of a spy thriller.
Absolutely. I mean, they'd studied his movements, they identified vulnerabilities, and they chose their moment with such precision. And the moment that Hariri's car, drew alongside the van, the explosives detonated, creating this scene of just unimaginable devastation.
I mean, the sources describe body parts scattered everywhere, this massive crater in the ground. It's just a horrifying testament to the sheer brutality of this attack.
It was awful. 23 people were killed, including Hariri, and over 200 were wounded, and many of them seriously. It was a real turning point in Lebanon's history, a moment that would really forever alter the political landscape.
And the fallout was immediate and global, wasn't it?
Absolutely. The assassination sent shockwaves through the international community. There was just this outpouring of condemnation directed at Syria, many people believing, based on the evidence that was emerging, that they were behind the attack.
So this act of violence that was perhaps meant to solidify their control really backfired in a spectacular way, wouldn't you say?
It certainly seems that way. Within months, Syria, facing that mounting pressure from the UN and the international community, was forced to withdraw its troops from Lebanon. And that ended nearly 3 decades of military presence.
But the story doesn't end there, does it? Because the sources then introduce us to this other key player, Ghazi Cannon. He was a high-ranking Syrian official who was essentially Assad's overseer in Lebanon.
Yeah, Kanan he was a powerful figure. He was deeply involved in Lebanese politics for years. He had cultivated these relationships with various factions, including, Hariri himself, and he was seen by some as a potential rival to Assad.
And then just a few months after the assassination, Cannon is found dead in his office. Another suspicious death.
Yeah, officially ruled a suicide. But the circumstances surrounding his death were very suspicious. Many believe that he was eliminated because he knew too much about the inner workings of the Hariri assassination and perhaps even posed a threat to Assad's grip on power.
So Cannon becomes another casualty in this ruthless game of power, much like Frankie Five Angels in the Godfather Part 2, eliminated to protect the family secrets.
It's a chilling parallel, and it raises some really important questions about how Assad was consolidating his power. Was he eliminating anyone who might pose a threat, even those within his own inner circle?
And how did this event, the assassination of Hariri, shape Assad's own journey? Did it push him further down a path of authoritarianism and violence? It is a chilling thought, isn't it? That idea that even those closest to power can become, expendable when their loyalty is questioned or their knowledge becomes a liability.
Power can be corrupting, especially in a system like that where there are very few checks and balances and where dissent is often met with really brutal consequences.
And this kind of brings us to a crucial question, right? How did this event, the assassination of Hariri, kind of reshape the way the world viewed Syria? Did it solidify their image as this rogue state operating outside the norms of international law?
Well, the assassination wasn't just a tragedy for Lebanon. It really had this ripple effect across the region and even the world, how the world saw Syria. And the sources suggest that the international community, already pretty wary of Assad's regime, they became even more distrustful. And this incident really seemed to confirm their suspicions about Syria's willingness to use violence and intimidation to achieve its goals.
So it wasn't just about the assassination itself, but the way that the regime responded, right?
Yeah.
Like the lack of transparency, the lack of accountability. That's really what damaged their reputation.
Exactly. Instead of cooperating with the international investigation, they obfuscated, they denied involvement, and they really just pointed fingers elsewhere. It was almost a classic case of, doubling down on the very behavior that was causing them so much trouble in the first place.
It's almost like they were trapped in this cycle of distrust and aggression, unable or maybe even unwilling to break free from the patterns of the past.
Right, and that actually brings us to another fascinating aspect of this whole story, how Syria under Assad really started to exhibit the characteristics of what some experts call a narco state.
Okay, so let's unpack that a little bit. What exactly does that mean, and how did this play out in Syria? I mean, it's a pretty serious accusation.
Yeah, so a narco state is basically a country where the government is deeply involved in the drug trade, right? They use it to finance their operations and really to maintain their grip on power. And the sources indicate that Syria, facing increasing economic pressure and all these international sanctions, really turned to drug trafficking as this lucrative revenue stream.
So what drugs are we talking about here, and how did this trafficking operate? I mean, what was its impact on Syria's economy, on its international relations?
Well, Captagon, which is you know a highly addictive amphetamine, that became a major export for them. The sources suggest that production facilities were actually set up, often with the knowledge and complicity of high-ranking officials, and these drugs were then smuggled across borders, generating these vast sums of money that flowed back into the regime's coffers.
So it was a way to kind of circumvent sanctions, fund their military, and maintain their grip on power. A classic case of, follow the money, but with really devastating consequences for those caught in the crossfire.
Absolutely. This illicit income stream really allowed them to operate with a certain degree of impunity, and it further fueled their authoritarian tendencies and really contributed to the instability of the region as a whole. And it's a pattern, frankly, that we've seen in other countries where the drug trade becomes so intertwined with political power. It just leads to this widespread corruption and human suffering.
This whole story just raises so many questions about the nature of power, right? And its
Yeah.
potential to corrupt. Did Bashar al-Assad ever have a chance to break free from this cycle of violence and control, to choose a different path? Or was he in a way kind of, destined to follow in his father's footsteps?
Yeah, it's a question that historians and political scientists will be debating, for years to come. The sources that we've looked at, they offer some clues, but they also highlight the complexity of Assad's character and the forces that really shaped his leadership.
You mentioned earlier how he was initially perceived as somewhat hesitant, even unprepared
Yeah.
for the weight of leadership. So how did that perception evolve over time?
Well, there's a fascinating kind of psychological dimension to this whole story, right? The sources suggest that Assad, perhaps feeling a bit insecure in his early years, kind of consciously adopted this more assertive, even ruthless persona. He wanted to project this image of strength and control both to his own people and to the world at large.
Almost like a classic case of overcompensation,
Yeah.
right? Like trying to escape the shadow of his father and prove his own worth, but resorting to these increasingly brutal methods to do so.
And that brutality, as we've seen, really became this defining characteristic of his rule. The assassination of Hariri, the silencing of potential rivals like Canaan, the embrace of the drug trade as this tool of state power. All of these actions really point to a leader who is willing to do whatever it takes to maintain control.
And the consequences of those choices, as we've discussed, were really profound. International isolation, this descent into narco state status, and this further erosion of trust both within Syria and on the world stage. It's a real cautionary tale, a reminder that the pursuit of power without any kind of ethical constraints can have devastating consequences.
Absolutely, and it's important to remember that these actions didn't happen in a vacuum, right? There were
Yeah.
there were all these internal and external forces at play, these complex geopolitical dynamics that contributed to this kind of downward spiral.
So where do we go from here? We've explored this dark side of power, this shadowy world of political maneuvering and intrigue. What are the key takeaways for our listeners? How can they connect this story to their own lives and the world around them?
It's a really crucial question and one that deserves careful consideration. The story of Bashar al-Assad's Syria is a reminder that power, when it's unchecked and unrestrained, can be this dangerous and really destructive force. And it's a call to be vigilant, to hold our own leaders accountable and to really try to understand these complexities of global events.
It's also a reminder that seemingly distant conflicts, like the one we've been discussing today, can have these far-reaching implications. I mean, the ripple effects of the Hariri assassination, the
Yeah.
destabilization of the region, the rise of drug trafficking networks, all of these things have had this really profound impact on global security and on the lives of countless individuals.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to stay informed, to engage in thoughtful dialogue and to support organizations that are working to promote peace, justice, and human rights in all corners of the world. Even small actions, when they're multiplied by millions, can really make a difference.
It's about reclaiming our agency, right? Recognizing that we all have a role to play in shaping a more just and equitable world. And that's a really powerful message to end on, a message of hope, of resilience, and of the enduring human capacity for positive change.
It really is. And it's been a real privilege exploring this complex and challenging topic with you today.
And to our listeners, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you'll continue to explore with us, to question, to learn, and to engage with the world around you. Until next time, keep diving deep. Yeah, it's a question that really makes you think, right? Like, what if things had gone differently? But as we've seen, the choices that are made both by individuals and by nations, they have these consequences that just kind of ripple outwards, shaping the course of history.
And it really highlights just how important it is to understand those choices, the motivations behind them, and this whole complex web of factors that influence, decision making at that level on the world stage.
We've really delved deep into this particular story, right? We've explored that shadowy world of Syrian politics, the assassination of Rafi Hariri, the rise of Bashar al-Assad, and the really tragic consequences that followed.
We've seen how power, when it's unchecked and fueled by ambition, can lead to this real descent into darkness, right? This cycle of violence and corruption that ultimately just harms everyone involved.
But amidst all that darkness, there's still a glimmer of hope, right? I mean, just the very act of examining these events, of understanding the forces at play, that's a step towards a more informed and engaged to the citizenry.
Exactly. Knowledge is power,
Right.
but it's only powerful when it's used to promote understanding, empathy and positive change.
So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive, what are the key takeaways for our listeners? What can they do with this knowledge? How can they apply it to their own lives and the world around them?
Well, the first step is awareness, right? It's about recognizing that even these seemingly distant conflicts, like the one we've discussed today, can have a real impact on our own lives. It's about understanding how interconnected global events really are and the ripple effects of political decisions.
It's also about being critical consumers of information,
Yeah.
right? Seeking out these diverse perspectives and even challenging our own assumptions. We can't afford to be passive observers in a world where, misinformation and propaganda are so rampant.
And most importantly, it's about action. It's about using our voices, our votes and our resources to support those organizations that are out there working to promote peace and justice and human rights around the world. Even small actions, when they're multiplied by millions, can really make a difference.
It's about reclaiming our agency. Recognizing that we all have a role to play in shaping a more just and equitable world. And that's a really powerful message to end on, a message of hope, of resilience, and really of that enduring human capacity for positive change.
It really has been a privilege to explore this complex and challenging topic with you today.
And to our listeners, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you'll continue to explore with us, to question, to learn, and to really engage with the world around you.
Until next time, keep diving deep.